Hello, everybody, and welcome to LABoral Art&Science Talks, which is this very interesting symposium that LABoral Art Center has put together to celebrate the different collaborations, the challenges, the potential achievements of putting in contact these two traditionally separated areas, which is scientific knowledge or research, if you like, on the one hand, and artistic practice on the other. So in this morning program, what we will have is a series of 3 conversations between artists whose work can be seen at the moment in LABoral Art Center, and a member of the scientific community that has either collaborated or inspired the production of that work of art. I have also to say that these sessions and these symposiums is in the frame, or can be framed in the context of the exhibition When the Butterflies of the Soul Flutter Their Wings, which is running at the moment at LABoral Art Center here on the north coast of Spain, in Gijón, and that again celebrates the contact between neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and art, and that I recommend everybody to come and visit if you haven't done so, because it's not only thought-provoking and inspiring, but it will stay with you for a long time. You will have a lot of questions at the end, and I hope that we can solve or answer some of these questions in the sessions this morning. So I would like to thank LABoral Art Center for their invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to chair this morning conversations. My name is Luzmar González Arias. I am a lecturer in the English department at the University of Oviedo, and my main area of expertise is the medical and environmental humanities. So I am also living at the crossroads of disciplines. So for me, these conversations will be definitely very enriching. So I want to extend my gratitude to the curator of the exhibition, Karin Ollenschlager, and also to all the technicians behind this. Without your help, guys, this would not be possible. So in coronavirus times, technical assistance is a must. So the way we will proceed is I will introduce the 2 speakers that I have with me in this first conversation. We will discuss some of the issues pertaining this contact zones between the arts and the sciences, and then we'll open the floor for questions at the end, the last 10 minutes or so. So any of you listening, if you want listening to this conversation, if you feel that you want to ask something to our guest speakers, feel free to do so. You can leave your comments or questions in the chat box or in the questions and answers chat box, and then we'll open the floor at the end. All right, so without any more delay, let me introduce Guy Benary, who is an artist and researcher whose work, Cell F, is at show in the exhibition that I was mentioning in LABoral. He's recognized internationally with numerous prizes, and he's been the recipient of a lot of awards. His work has been presented in exhibitions all around the world. Actually, his work is part of the permanent exhibition in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He's considered a major artist and an innovator working across science and media arts. Guy specializes in biotechnological artwork, which aims to enrich our understanding of what it means to be alive. And let me tell you that if you visit his piece at LABoral, you definitely will have loads of questions about life, what it means to be alive. By his side is Stuart Hodgetts, who is also like Guy Benary. I forgot to say that he's based in Australia, in Perth, in Western Australia. Stuart is also based in the University of Western Australia and is an associate professor there, has extensive knowledge and expertise in cell and stem cell-based transplantation therapies. Since 2003, he's focused his expertise towards spinal cord repair using clinical-grade adult human mesenchymal stem cells, sorry if I'm mispronouncing the technical lingo, the specific lingo, as well as in combination of gene therapy in vivo, reprogramming, tissue engineering, neuroprotection, immunomodulation of the host immune response, and non-invasive therapies such as red and near-infrared light and repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. Wow! For my introduction of these of our speakers, you can see that they belong to different areas of expertise, that they speak different languages, but they have definitely managed to create this in-between space that is neither here nor there, but that is in both places at the same time. They have managed to create a really fruitful and successful collaboration. So welcome, Guy, welcome, Stuart. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And I would like, if it's okay with you, I would like to start with Guy, who can introduce his piece at LABoral for us and explain what it is about, because it's a very complex piece, especially for art audiences that are not used to this kind of art.
Thank you. Thank you for to LABoral for inviting us to show the work in such a crazy year and actually pursuing the production of this exhibition. It's quite impressive that you've done it. And thank you for inviting Stuart and myself for to this panel. Self in a nutshell is very hard to explain, but I was warned not to take 20 minutes or half an hour to describe the piece. So I'll just kind of describe what it is, and then if there's any questions about the issues that it's generating or the kind of artistic kind of background for it or premise of it, I'm happy to answer questions. Self is, I've been working in Symbiotica, the art studio here in UWA for the past 21 years, I think. And through the years, most of the work, or a lot of the work that I produced was focused on neural networks, neuroscience and neural networks, almost like the deconstruction of creativity and consciousness into kind of its basic units and looking at forming those external brains or in vitro brains through the growth of neural networks that are alive and respond to stimulations. And I produced a few works. Most of them were in collaboration with Stuart. Self is almost like the culmination of a few of those projects. I mean, 2013 or something like that, I got a fellowship to produce a self-portrait, a biological self-portrait. And what I decided to do is to grow my own external brain or kind of in vitro brain. And when I say brain, I mean quote unquote brain. It's not a real brain. It's a neural network, two-dimensional neural network that grows on an interface. So what I've done, I had a biopsy taken from my arm and I grew my skin cells. And then I used stem cell technology, a very new technology that was developed in probably 2007 by the Japanese researcher Yamanaka, called IPS, Induced Pluripotent Stem Cells Technology. And what it allows us to do, it allows us to reprogram it allowed me to reprogram my adult skin cells that I grew in the lab into stem cells. So the cells went through almost like, I see it, and Stuart can talk about the exact science there, but we both can, but I see it as almost like reverse engineering the cells into their embryonic kind of state, taking them from a specialized cell to become a stem cell. So taking it back in time, getting it to lose its identity and become a stem cell. And we know that stem cells can then be differentiated into specialized cells or other cells in the body. So I differentiated those stem cells into neurons, and I grew them on a specialized interface, 64 electrodes. So I could actually record electric signals that the neurons were producing. So in 64, the resolution 64 areas of the Petri dish, I could actually record and could start looking at what the neurons are doing as far as their interaction and activity in the Petri dish. But what's interesting about this technology is that not only that we can record the electric activity of the neurons, we can stimulate them. In other words, we can inform them about external events or send them information about the outside world. We can give a body to those neurons. And by stimulating them, an interesting question is whether they would change their functional plasticity, the way they work, the way they're organized on the dish in results of those stimulations. So this is the basic technology that Stuart and myself developed and optimized and worked in the lab, and we grew my own neural networks. I used to refer to it as my external brain, or I still refer to it as my external brain. And then I started to think about where is the self-portrait here? But that was after 3 years of work that I looked at myself through the microscope, and I had so many bad days. It was so hard and such a lengthy task to optimize the protocols and get the neurons to do what we wanted them to do, that I didn't want to look at myself again and produce another or a self-portrait, and I decided to portray one of my childhood juvenile dreams of becoming a rock star, of becoming David Bowie. So I decided to give my external brain a body, to embody it with a body that is a sound-producing body. And the choice was to use analog modular synthesizers for various kind of reasons, but mainly this, and I'm oversimplifying it right now, this notion that they work in a really similar way to neural networks, where analog components or components of this network in the neural network and in the kind of network of the analog modular synthesizers, there's signals, voltages that go through those components to produce data in the neural networks example, or sound, which is data in the analog synthesizer. So they work in a really similar way, and they're both analog. So we juxtaposed those two networks, and we made one network out of them. So, you know, this piece doesn't have computers, they don't have microprocessors. It's 100% wetware and hardware. We call it a wetalog synthesizer or performer, cybernetic performer. So self is basically, the neural networks are controlling the sound that is produced by the analog modular synthesizers. But I didn't want to, you know, my dream wasn't to be a synthesizer, it was to be a performer. So we created some sort of a platform where we invite musicians, human musicians, to come and jam with this cybernetic musician self. And we created this system where the musicians, the human musicians, and the neurons could improvise in live sets in one-off performances, where the human musicians, when they kind of practice or they rehearse with the self, they learn how to stimulate through their music, sending certain kind of frequencies, the neural network. So they can actually decide when to stimulate the neurons, and then the neurons kind of usually respond to those stimulations, and they kind of play in a kind of, you know, post-human performance. I just kind of say one more thing. When we developed this project, you know, I was thinking about the self-portraiture, and I was thinking about kind of embodying myself and self-embodiment, etc. But, you know, in hindsight, during the last 5 years, we showed and performed quite a lot in, it's a pity because of the corona, we couldn't come for a performance in LABoral, but we performed quite a lot with self. And most of the time, we were invited to show the piece in AI, artificial intelligence, kind of frameworks or exhibitions or festivals. But self is not an AI-based piece, and it's not based on artificial intelligence. There's no computers, there's no algorithms that are kind of running, but it's not natural intelligence as well. There's no real brains. It's not an organism, whole organism. So we felt the need to create the lack of taxonomy, there's a void in the taxonomy of what it is, the language that can describe it. So we decided to actually coin a new term that will describe self in a better way, and we refer to it today as a in vitro intelligence-driven entity. And we wrote a couple of papers about that, and also self itself we see as a surrogate performer. So it's a surrogate to the donor, that in that case was myself, but it is a performer that can actually go and perform with or without kind of a link to the original donor. And I will just say the last sentence about it is that Stuart and myself, with our colleague Nathan Thompson, are working on a new piece of a new kind or example of a surrogate performer that, if you're interested, we can talk about it later on. So that's self in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a complex piece indeed, just by when you are there in front of it and you see all the cable work on all the materials. You have the accompanying video explaining what is behind the piece, but you realize that we're in front of a kind of art that is, as we were saying, kind of midway between what we traditionally thought artistic practice was and what we understand as scientific research. So I want to talk to Stuart about this. I would like Stuart to tell us how it was to start collaborating with an artist, and what was your initial reaction, when you started your collaborations? Were you in disbelief? Did you find this was a possibility? What was your initial reaction as a scientist, and how are you feeling in terms of that collaboration? Is it very different from working with other members of your scientific community? Is there a big difference between those kinds of collaborations?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for letting me speak along with Guy about our work. So, I was doing my traditional laboratory-based work in about, I think it was 98 actually, Guy. So it's been 23 years rather than 21. And then Symbiotica arrived in Perth, and I was actually working with one of the people who helped Symbiotica become established in the building where I am. And so I was approached to help out, pass on some of the techniques to Symbiotica, Guy and Aaron and Nat, and that involved basically showing them how to do tissue culture techniques in the laboratory. So showing them some very basic techniques just to sort of get them started. And then, of course, I started interacting at a slightly higher level when I found out all of the different types of projects that they were embarking upon. And it was very interesting for me because it was a new approach of asking questions about things that I was doing almost on a daily basis anyway. And to hear these questions was actually very stimulating for me, because I'd never really asked those kind of questions myself. And so I became more and more intrigued about what they were doing, and then we started to become more acquainted with each other, and we started doing more work and going a little bit deeper into the science. And then I suddenly realized that, I wanted to be more involved with this, because it was actually helping me as a scientist to look at my own work in a more creative way, in a different way, and ask similar questions, but different enough for me to take so much of an interest that I actually started to devote more and more of my time to helping out Symbiotica with many, many different types of projects. And I very quickly became the scientific consultant for Symbiotica, and I was actually employed by Symbiotica for a small amount of time. And I still do it now. So I look at all of the Symbiotica residence applications, and I provide help. If I can't provide the help myself, I put them in touch with people who can do that. But in terms of my collaboration with Guy, I've always found that Guy's come up with really much more challenging issues for me to deal with as a scientist, because they were that much closer, not only to things that I hadn't asked myself about my own work, but also that I could potentially provide him with a solution to get him to the next step that he needed. I very often use this analogy when I'm asked about my collaborations with artists, is that it's like taking a drug. After a while, you just need that next hit, and it doesn't matter how many times they sort of sheepishly knock on my door and say, "Oh, do you have a few minutes?" It's like, yes, come on in, come on in. So it was a very natural process for me to become more interested in collaborating with people like Guy. And of course, Guy and I have become very good friends over the years, and we share a lot of ideas. And as I said, Guy's approach to his work has helped me think about my work in a different way. And I'm sure that my meddling around in Guy's thought processes as well has helped him direct some of his efforts into perhaps making the project slightly different from his initial thoughts. So it is a slightly different way of interacting with scientists. I do have to say before I continue that part, though, that well, not all scientists are always appreciative of having somebody in the same building who performs artistic works rather than scientific works. So there are several people who think that has little value. Most people in our school, I think, really do value Symbiotica and Guy as well. But there is a clear difference between some people's views on what art is and what should be, and how it interacts and marries with science. But I've often found that most people are extremely supportive. And so it's very easy, therefore, to help get involved and collaborate with artists. So for myself, I would say that it's actually very easy, very similar type of work style, because the work is very often only a spit away from what real science is anyway. And I very often use the analogy that artists who use the biological palette for their own art are really practicing science. And in the old days, there never used to be this dissociation between science and art. They were exactly the same thing. And I'm very much supportive of that, is that they're actually quite similar practices. So, and more recently, the Self project, I think has been one of the most, if not the most interesting art projects I've ever been involved with. I have to say that our new project, I think, probably tops Self even better. So I don't know what we're going to do after the new project, Guy, but it really is, it has provided me with an avenue of potential work that I think I could gain from the new projects that can actually stand alone as a scientific body, regardless of the art component. So I see the benefit of both sides, and I'm very lucky in that way to be able to do so.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned that some members of the scientific community, not all obviously, but some, show some resistance to this kind of collaborations. I think knowledge is still very fragmented, you know, in our world. Like we have this little boxes where we put the sciences, or where we put the arts, or where we put literature, and there's not enough contact. There are not enough contact zones, not enough habitable spaces, you know, cross-fertilizing each other. So that's why I think collaborations like yours is particularly interesting and particularly fruitful. And I wanted to ask you if the two of you, each one speaking from your own, you know, main area, so to speak, when you collaborate and you create this liminal space, this in-between space, you know, that is the result of your conversation coming from these two different worlds, traditionally separated, you draw some conclusions, either for your artistic practice in the case of Guy, or for your scientific research in the case of Stuart. Now, are those conclusions, you know, or those feelings, or those sensations, or that knowledge, if you like, complementary to what you would have achieved if you stayed only within your, you know, worlds, or are they contradictory? They complement your scientific knowledge in the case of Stuart, your artistic practice in the case of Guy. are they contradictory, those conclusions, or are they complementary? I don't know if I managed to put my question clearly enough.
Well, I don't think that they're contradictory at all. I mean, a lot of the projects that I'm involved with, and some of them were in collaboration with Stuart, but other scientists as well, produced, we used to refer to them as, and self in a way could be like that, as it could be seen like that as well, is that when it's presented in the gallery, there's always kind of two parallel set of experiments that are produced. With Art and Silent Barrage, again, projects that Stuart was involved in their production as well. We worked with the American neuroscientist Steve Potter, and his students were actually drawing, every time that we exhibited those projects, they were collecting the data, and they published a few scientific papers and a PhD chapter, PhD chapter about the data that was collected from those exhibitions, while I was looking at those projects that were installed in galleries as a cultural experiment, where we kind of looked at how people respond to those kind of living entities that we presented in the gallery, and what sort of a cultural dialogue they kind of produced. With self as well, lots of the protocols that we've been developing are being used in Stuart labs, and lots of Stuart's ideas are being implemented. I don't think that there's any contradiction. I think that we work, and I told you that at the beginning, that I hope that we won't disappoint you. The way Stuart and myself are working is I don't see any separation between the worlds. I don't see any differences in the language. I do tissue culture, and Stuart is looking at drawings and kind of contributes his kind of ideas about aesthetics, etc. There's some sort of between the two of us, there's some sort of a synergy with the way we work, and I understand that it's not always like that in kind of labs. Stuart, what do you think?
Absolutely, and I think art and science are really driven by, what is the question? If the question is good enough to ask, you approach the same problem, perhaps in slightly different ways, but you're basically asking the same question. And for a lot of the time, I think the answers are exactly the same. And Guy's right, the way we work together, it's not about how we work or which components we both work on. It's about how do we come up with a solution to allow us to answer this question. In science, your hypothesis is proposed, and then you design experiments to try and destroy that hypothesis. And if your hypothesis is good enough, it survives that attack, right? So it must have been a good hypothesis. It's exactly the same when we're talking about an artistic project. The problem is there. The question is, can we get from here to there? And what does it mean? And what will the result be? The way we go about that work is almost exactly the same. It just means that we very often help each other out. I would trust Guy to do any scientific work in my laboratory for any level, because he's at the level now where I could employ him as a scientist. So, and that's not just come from me teaching him things. That's just because of the way he approaches his work, and the questions he asks are exactly the same thing. So when we have a problem, I attack it and try and give Guy a solution, and then we work together, we look at it and see it's not quite right, and we come around and we try it from another angle. That's science as well. So I see no difference whatsoever.
I have to add to just add to that. I totally agree with you, Stuart, even though I don't have a lab book, which you would be very upset about. But the thing is that, first of all, there are differences. We are describing here some sort of utopian kind of scenario. But there are some differences, of course, but I agree with Stuart that the way we kind of asking the questions, whether it's a scientific research that kind of leads to a really rigid experiment that is kind of being done over and over and over and over again to understand this little bit, or an art project that is working on some sort of stretched truth or kind of provocative kind of scenario, speculative future that is very kind of unlike, very unscientific. But the way we kind of achieve, when we approach the technology, and the way we kind of looking at the implementation of technology into this kind of framework could be quite similar. I mean, the scientific methodology is different to a methodology of artists. I mean, it's very rigid. You have the hypothesis, and then you have the experimentation, then you have to repeat and then publish. I mean, we're quite lucky that we don't have to do this kind of repetition, and we work in kind of different ways. But there's something fundamental in the approach of kind of the curiosity that we kind of show, that kind of initiates this kind of process of trying to figure out where we want to go, that to me is very similar.
Yeah, and also the repetition, until you find an answer to that question, you're testing things in both cases. You test things in a laboratory, it's a trial and error process, and you try things and repeat. It's kind of ritualistic even in both areas. We have to try and experiment until we find something that kind of answers, at least partially, the question we stem from. So what I think it's very, very interesting about this exhibition at LABoral, about your work and the other works exhibited in LABoral at the moment, is that I think all of you illustrate what I would call a real collaboration, because sometimes we have this hierarchy of knowledges, like usually the sciences are kind of at the top of the hierarchy of what knowledge and progress in the sciences are there, kind of at the top. And then artistic practice is like an instrument to embellish scientific knowledge, or, you can use a quotation by a writer to kind of embellish a scientific paper, or you can help, through the humanities, you can help, members of the scientific community to communicate their results better, at a linguistic level. Or on the other side, the sciences can be used as, background knowledge to produce a piece of art, but that scientific knowledge is completely hidden, so to speak, in the final product. But you really illustrate a space in between, a habitable space. And I think that's very difficult to achieve, because the world is not used to these extraordinary collaborations. At least I think we are not used to those collaborations, which are, I think, the objective. We should aim for that.
I'll tell you, I mean, I'll tell you that I'm very spoiled. Yeah, I'm very lucky and I'm very spoiled. And it's because I'm a researcher in Symbiotica, and this is the strength of Symbiotica. I also hold a position in the school, so I'm here every day. It's not a limited residency of 3 months. If I was here in 3 months, I wouldn't be able to grow the brain organoids that we're growing now in the lab, because I didn't study science, and I don't have any kind of science background. So it took me a lot of time to master those technologies, tissue engineering, microscopy, molecular biology, with the help of Stuart and other scientists here. But I'm totally independent here. And the fact that I'm here every single day in Symbiotica, and Symbiotica is located in the School of Anatomy and Human Biology, Physiology and Human Biology, where various research from various kind of fields of research are located, makes it very easy for me. It's very hard for artists to come for 3 months, 6 months, or even 1 year to get to this sort of relationship that Stuart and myself kind of formed through the years. So, I feel very lucky, very spoiled and very lucky to be able to do those things.
I think I could add to that, because a lot of the symbiotic residents who do come for much shorter times, if I'm very lucky, I can put them in contact with somebody who's able to provide the same sort of input that I am able to help Guy out with. It's not always possible to do that. And it's not always possible to find the same kind of input from every scientist who's willing to drop their day-to-day work to help a resident perform their work. I would say that they're generally very, very helpful, But some of the luck that Guy is talking about as well is actually that willingness to collaborate. And not everybody is in the same space. And I have to admit that I've become more open to collaborating with artists, residents, as well as people like Guy, because they have actually drawn me to that space where I feel much more comfortable collaborating with people like that, because they actually do help me with my own work. That's not always going to be the same for every scientist. And so the amount of help that somebody might get in a very short period or a very short residency is potentially not enough for them to answer all of their questions. And so they might leave with a certain amount of frustration that they didn't get absolutely everything done. I would probably counter that and say that a lot of residents actually leave because they've had to change their project for the better, because they've thought about the science around what they're trying to achieve and the questions that they're asking. And they've actually modified their project quite happily because of that interaction. So even if you do find yourself in that space where things don't always necessarily align the way you thought they would, most people come away feeling that they've actually gained something rather than they've lost something. And I think that's a special collaboration at any level. Yeah.
I'm sure, yeah. And do you think then the main challenges that these collaborations pose may be institutional? What I mean by institutional is, I don't know, in terms of getting funding, submitting applications for funding, where, you know, the funding bodies are used to this fragmentation of knowledge that we were talking about before. You know, either you apply as a mathematician for a mathematics project, or you apply as an artist to a fine arts body, funding body, whatever. Are these very challenging situations or not? Or do you think institutionally we are, you know, the world is creating spaces for this type of work?
The world is not creating spaces for this kind of work. Unfortunately, I think that we're going the other way. I mean, I think that universities and around the world are in quite a lot of trouble, especially after the last year. And I think that the funding are being cut. And, you know, my fear is that places like Symbiotica or other similar places in the world that are actually located and very active in academic institutions are being considered as nice to have rather than must have, you know. And I hope that we'll pass this very difficult kind of times without kind of closing or cutting or, and I'm not talking about us, I'm talking anywhere in the world. You know, I mean, unfortunately, one of the first areas where kind of people cut budgets for countries or institutions like universities is culture. I hope that it's not going to affect the research centers and the research labs around the world, because I feel that it's very, very important. And, you know, kind of to add to what Stuart kind of just kind of said is that, you know, I mean, when you talk about collaborations in the biological world, and it's a little bit different to kind of other kind of field. I think that bioart is a little bit different because the technology is not available in kind of DIY kind of hacker labs. Some of it does exist, of course. But, you know, if we're talking about electrophysiology recordings of neural networks, or kind of growing brain organoids in tissue culture labs, and kind of virus transfections to induce cells to be reprogrammed, you really need to work in labs. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to master those techniques. And, you know, I mean, my approach is that if I can't do it myself, I shouldn't do it at all. So this is why most of those projects that I develop with Stuart's help and support, and sometimes we learn those technologies together. You know, they probably usually take 3 to 4 years to develop. Self took 3 years to develop. Bricolage, my new project, took 3.5, and this new project that Stuart and I, Nathan Thompson, are working on is going to take another 4 years. So this is the time scale that it takes us to figure it out, even though we are in the labs. So it's quite, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think also the new project that we're working on is actually a very good example of how the questions that we've come up from the artistic side are actually helping us drive the production of new technologies. So we're actually in contact with people who are the current manufacturers of current technologies, and we've basically gone to them and said, look, we want to do this. Have you got something that we could potentially use? And I think to our credit, we've actually now infected this company to actually dedicate resources and time to come up with a solution for us to use, because it's also in their interest to come up with a new technology. Because if I'm one scientist and an artist working together, they obviously see the value of, well, there could be more of these bio-art collaborations, but there could be more scientific uses for this as well. So there's clearly a use for that. And with some projects like the one we're working on, that's a big driver of emergent technology. And not everybody can say that. And that's a big plus.
I totally agree with you, Stuart. And, you know, I mean, we won't kind of tell you exactly what it is because we're just starting, but also we don't have time for that, I think. But basically, we're kind of looking at solution of exhibiting long-term, for years, biological work on permanent installations in museums. So we could actually maintain and record something like self to be working for 10 years in a museum with minimal intervention of technicians. I mean, today we can't do that because we need to feed the cells every second day, and it's very fragile. And, you know, we need to be there to take care of this needy entity. We're trying to kind of be able to come up with solutions to be able to show biological work that is, we're kind of more focused on cell-based stem cells, neural networks, cardiomyocytes, heart muscle cells, whatever it is for long term. The interesting thing is that when we got to those researchers and the companies that they're in touch with, they were really interested in them because while thinking about our artistic challenge, they're starting to think about space travel or kind of working in remote stations in Antarctica, or, you know, the North Pole, so, you know, in places that you need to maintain biological material alive for long periods of time. So it was the artistic questions that generated a scientific or technological need.
Yeah, how far into the project are you? How long have you been working on that?
Well, we've been thinking about it for 2-3 years, and we have been working on it for, I can tell you in a nutshell what it is. Stuart, Nathan Thompson, and myself are collaborating with one of the greatest composers that is still alive, Alvin Lucier. Wow. And Alvin is 90 years old. And we worked with him, and he donated his blood to us, and we created stem cells from his white blood cells. I have them growing now here in the lab. Alvin is with us in the lab here. And we're growing now brain organoids from them. And we're going to use them in what we want to do is to create some sort of a framework where Alvin could perform forever. He could perform, we would install his surrogate performer in a museum, and that he would keep on playing and keep on producing new memories and new music, new compositions forever into the future, even after he's gone. So, in other words, we're working on immortalizing Alvin Lucier and to create a surrogate performer that would represent him or continue to produce, into the future.
Wow, so you are pushing the boundaries of the definition of being alive, as we were saying, as I was saying in the introduction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah, go on. interrupted you. Sorry, I interrupted you. So please continue. Yeah.
No, I kind of said that you're absolutely right. I mean, we are kind of asking the questions about kind of what it is to be alive in the 21st century. We're looking at, this project is, as you can imagine, would involve, and we're kind of working with a neuroethicist that is kind of looking at the ethics of this project with law scholars from UWA that are kind of looking at the legalities, copyrights of the music that it would produce later on. Of course, it's not going to be there's not going to be any modular, the whole project and the aesthetics and the scale of it is going to be very different. We're looking at an architectural environment that is going to host and interact with Alvin's brain organ. So we're looking at the ethical and the legal copyright issues to do with agency, with identity. There's quite a lot of questions that are coming that we're kind of dealing with right now when we're thinking about this project.
Wow. And
the sensitivities around having his, Alvin is a big name. And the sensitivities of having his material in a museum. How are people going to interact with it? How is it going to be even communicated to the viewers?
Wow, that's fascinating. Please keep us posted. I mean, what Stuart, is this collaborations? I mean, is this research that you are doing? This collaboration with Guy and with these artistic projects. Does this run parallel to your, let's call it, scientific research, or is it completely integrated into it? I mean, I'm talking in terms of your career. Like, are you forced by your institution to produce a certain number of papers on a specific so-called scientific project, and then running parallel to this is your collaboration, or is it perfectly integrated in your case professionally?
Yeah, well, look, most scientists are professional beggars, so we normally have to get grants to pay for our own salaries. So it's unusual for the university to tell us what to research. As far as my own research goes, I've been doing spinal cord repair, and I've been using stem cells as a cell replacement strategy to try and repair the spinal cord. When Guy first had the opportunity to use neural networks in his artwork, we had to come up with a system of being able to get feedback from the cells. And so we used these multi-electrode arrays to help us do that. And it was a sort of a DIY system. And the benefit for me was that I could use this device to actually help prove to me that the stem cells I was putting back into my models of spinal cord injury repair into the animals I was using would actually be able to turn into functional neurons that had electrophysiological output. That's essentially what that piece of equipment allowed me to do. And so that was really where it stopped. But then Self came along, and this new project came along. And it has fortunately made me think about a complementary part of work that's not part of my normal routine. So I have now devoted extensive amounts of funding resources into getting better equipment to use for these new projects. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and rooms, dedicated rooms that have been, even just to provide Faraday shielding around the room itself costs nearly $250,000. I wouldn't be doing that unless I had that collaboration with Guy.
Right.
So
I'm nagging him all the time.
Yeah, no, like it's fascinating. I find it really fascinating what you're doing, and I'm sure our audience is also finding it fascinating. I don't want to monopolize the questions, so let's open the floor to anybody who would like to ask either Guy or Stuart any question related to all of these. Let's say you can leave the questions on the chat box or in this question answers box that we have in this Zoom platform. I don't know if people need time. I'm a slow thinker myself. I always need time to process, you know, information such as this before I compose an intelligent question.
While we're waiting for a question, I can just compliment what Stuart said. I mean, Stuart is a very busy, you know, I mean, I think he's being modest. I mean, he's a very busy scientist. He has students and he's doing his own research, but he's very kind and he's very generous with his time. As he kind of said, I mean, he's one of those scientists that is very open to art and science collaborations, and we're very lucky to. I'm very lucky. Right now, he doesn't have a choice because we're really. But you know, previously in the kind of early days, I was very lucky that, you know, he was there to help me think about what I want to do, if it's possible even. But also all the other scientists that are coming, artists that are coming for residencies to Symbiotica, you know, they talk to Oron Katz, the director of Symbiotica, but they also go through Stuart that kind of advises them. So, you know, I mean, the fact that he's generous, very generous in his time doesn't mean that he's not, you know, he's a very busy scientist and he has his own career. Well, now he has two careers.
Yeah, well, collaborations always imply generosity, don't they? Because
yeah.
You have to give and take, and you have to negotiate. I imagine, you know, the process is probably full of its ups and downs. And as you said, it was not presented as a utopian land. Like it's a process, I imagine, of many conversations. We have a question in our chat box. The question reads: your art science research is recognized within the scientific community. Is there recognition, acknowledgement?
Is that a question or a statement?
That's a question. Is it?
Well, yeah, I think so, because I would answer from an artist's point of view. Yes, I have published a paper in Nature magazine. It was an invited editorial where I talked about my research. So, you know, and I published a few other papers in, kind of scientific papers as collaborators of Stuart and others. But, you know, I mean, I think that Nature wrote, well, I published one paper in Nature, and Nature wrote 2 or 3 other times about my own work. So I have, you know, Stuart is a collaborator, but I have collaborations in Harvard stem cell facility, in Berlin, in the MDX stem cell facility. I have quite a lot of scientific collaborators around the world, all of which are very interested in the work, which to me says that there's some sort of acknowledgement of the fact that what I do is of interest for science or the scientists.
Wow, yeah. How about you, Stuart? Do you feel recognized by the scientific community, acknowledged?
Yeah, well, yes, certainly. I think, I mean, there are very few people who are in the position that I'm in who get to publish in Nature. So that is a huge feather in anybody's cap, let alone an artist. So, you know, in terms of that, that is a huge amount of recognition. I mean, I've published together with Guy in a respectable journal about self, and that's really useful for me in terms of my own career. I've also published in Leonardo along with Symbiotica residents. So that publication, that's publish or perish. That's the currency of a lot of our work these days. Scientists always really driving for publication. Not every work is suitable for publication though, but that doesn't mean that it's not scientifically recognized and appreciated.
Sure.
And I think, again, for Guy to be able to say that he's collaborating with people in these top-notch institutes is, you know, there aren't many scientists who can say that, let alone artists. So I think the question is, yes, it certainly is recognizable in the scientific community.
Yeah, we have only 5 minutes to go, but there are 3 very interesting questions in the chat box. I'm trying to put together the first 2, and then
we'll answer really fast. Don't worry.
The first one is: what would you recommend to other universities if they would like to create an art science lab, which is connected to the next question, or how to facilitate these collaborations beyond the goodwill, you know, of the 2 participants? So, what would you recommend universities, institutions to do to create this kind of labs?
think that the model of Symbiotica is a very good model. So I recommend that they talk to Oran Katz, the director of Symbiotica. But I also think that a few things that made Symbiotica so successful were that, first of all, it was an independent lab. It was run by artists, not by anyone else. The research there was purely artistic and independent. And also the location of the lab was in a scientific school. So the fact that actually Symbiotica is located in the School of Anatomy, Physiology, and Human Biology means that we have access to people like Stuart, but also others. I mean, there's a lot of really amazing people here that really helped us work. Stuart is just one of them, but and he's kind of the main collaborator and the scientific consultant of Symbiotica, but there's a lot of other scientists that, you just knock on the door, you go and you sit and you talk to them. So I think that if you're looking at kind of biology and art, I think that the location of the school is very, very important.
Yeah.
I also think one of the key points would be to get institutes to actually educate them as to what the benefits of art-science collaborations are in terms of driving the emergence of new technologies and driving cultural change as well. These are equally as important as each other. And I think if a university is well educated to the potential benefits of such collaborations, they will see the value instantly. And that really is key, is that a lot of institutes won't see that avenue.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. Now, there is another question. Let's try to be very quick answering this. Sylvia thanks you for the talk, and she says, I would like to ask a question about the ethical boundaries of your research, if you ever had to consider this aspect.
Of course, all our work, every single work that we've done, we consider heavily the ethics. First of all, as residents in Symbiotica and part of the School of Anatomy, Physiology, and Human Biology, we have to go through human ethics or animal ethics for every single project of ours. So this is kind of looking at the work that we're doing. But beyond that, beyond the rubber stamp that we get or don't get from the ethical, if we don't get an ethical approval, we don't do the project. So this is one aspect of that. But we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but if you read the papers that we write and kind of look at other papers that Oron Katz and Yonat Zur wrote about projects in Symbiotica, every single project that we have here needs to have a very thorough and very deep ethical consideration, because we are talking about manipulating life. And when we get to the point where we are actually manipulating life and we have the ability to engineer life, the ethical discussion is extremely important. I'm growing neural networks outside of the body, and the question is, what happens? What would happen when they, potentially in the future, reach a point where they could show emergent behavior or intelligence? It's a very scary and very problematic proposition.
Sure, definitely the marriage between the aesthetic and the ethical should not be underestimated, in the kind of work you do. Stuart, very quickly, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, very, very quickly. At the very simple level, as a Symbiotica consultant, I very often, because I'm also the chair of the Animal Users Committee at the university, I give advice on whether or not they would achieve ethics approval for their project proposals, as well as biosafety. And sometimes we actually have to say no before they even start.
Sure, yeah. Well, guys, Stuart, thank you so much. This has been a really interesting conversation, very edifying and above all, very inspiring. I think the whole audience will feel exactly the same. Thank you for your work and for your generosity, for sharing it with us. And I would like to tell our audience that we will be resuming the connection around 11:15, because we have another conversation along the same lines with Ursula and Georg Trogemann. So you're all very welcome to stay online. And don't be shocked if you see the technicians helping us with testing, because the testing has to happen in between the different conversations. So those of you who will stay online, we'll see that we are working with the technicians for 15 minutes, but the session will start at 11:15. Thank you again, Guy. Good afternoon here in Australia. Good place to be, COVID-free or almost COVID-free. And please keep us posted on your work. And I'm sure all of us will visit virtually your laboratory, will visit the Symbiotica lab because it's also inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and good morning. Thank you for joining us for this second session in the LABoral Art&Science talks, which is organized as part of this symposium to celebrate the collaborations between the world of sciences and scientific research and the world of artistic practice. For those of you who were not online, who did not see the previous conversation, let me just very briefly contextualize this conversation organized by LABoral in the context of the exhibition When the Butterflies of the Soul Fluttered Their Wings, Art, Neuroscience, and Artificial Intelligence that you can visit right now at LABoral. And I strongly encourage those of you who haven't seen it and who have the opportunity to travel to Gijón or to go to Gijón to definitely see this very inspiring exhibition. So I want to thank Karin Ollenschlager, the curator of the exhibition and the soul behind all of this machinery, for her invitation, because it's a real privilege and an honor and a pleasure for me to be to chair this morning's sessions. My name is Luzmar González Arias. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Oviedo, working in the fields of medical and environmental humanities. So I am fascinated by this cross-fertilization between different areas of expertise, and it's great to be part of all of this. I want to thank also all our technicians. Without their help, this would not be possible. But in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic limitations, at least we can hold this virtual meeting. So we must be thankful for all of that. Now, what we will do in the following hour, in the next hour, is we'll talk to Ursula Damm and Georg Trogemann. I'll briefly introduce them to you in a minute. And as we did in the previous session, we'll have a conversation, but we will open the floor for questions for the last 15 minutes. So feel free to leave your questions in either the chat box or the question answers box in this platform in Zoom, and we will address those questions at the end. All right. So without any more ado, without any more time to devote to this introduction, I would like to welcome Ursula Damm and Georg Trogemann, our two speakers for this session. Thank you very much for being with us and spending your time and sharing your expertise with us. Now, Ursula Damm, her work, I have to say that her work Membrane is shown in the exhibition at LABoral at the moment. She studied at the Art Academy in Düsseldorf, and that was followed by postgraduate studies at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne. Since 2008, she holds the chair for media environments at the Bauhaus University in Weimar, where she established a DIY biolab and the performance platform at the Digital Bauhaus Lab. Ursula Damm has exhibited worldwide, numerous installations on the relationship of nature, science, and civilization. So she's one of these artists that is used to inhabiting these in-between spaces, if you like. Georg Trogemann has been a professor of experimental informatics at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne since 1994. He studied computer science and mathematics at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing, where he received his doctorate in 1990. From 1997 to 1999, and then later from 2004 to 2006, he was the prorector for research and infrastructure at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne. His research topics include experimental algorithms, philosophy of technology, and the theory of artifacts. Again, as was the case with the previous speakers, in the first session this morning. From these bios, this small bios, you can see that our speakers are very used to cross boundaries between what we would call the traditional disciplines of the arts and the world of what we call scientific research. So welcome, good morning, almost good afternoon. And thank you for being here. And if you like, we could start this conversation by asking Ursula to introduce us to membrane and to tell us something about the piece. And let's start from that point, if you like.
Good morning, and thank you very much also for having me with you in Madrid or in the internet. I'm very glad that I can speak here about membrane, because membrane is the most recent piece I made with neural network. And the first piece I made in 1999, I was still a student from Georg Trogemann at the KHM Lab 3, so-called Lab 3. And we had a guest from Madrid, it was Karin Ohlenschläger. And that made that my first installation with neural network was shown then in Madrid at that time. So membrane, what is different to membrane, or between the membrane and the earlier works, is that membrane should be a contemporary approach. So the contemporary algorithms like the GAN algorithms, in our case the TGAN algorithm, which is then not only used to produce the normal expected or outcomes produced through the neural networks, but it should open the whole black box to the visitors and to get them kind of in touch with the internal structures of the neural network, all these abstract artifacts occurring during the processing of the network. And therefore we created this interface, which makes it possible that at the same time the visitors can work with two cameras. They see directly the input from the reality, then the transformation from the algorithms, and they can even change the camera position, that they see what are the parameters, what are the givens, and how can we influence the neural networks. That shows also not only the achievement from the actual software, but also the prospective possibilities in including a bit more the audience or the situation, the environment. And that is perhaps what membrane should do. One more thing, perhaps. So what we are showing is the latent space, of course, and there in a quite abstract way, because we have pre-processing. But what is important there is that you see the abstract mathematical fictions, and that is something where Georg Trogemann and I wrote an article about. So, and that is something perhaps Georg could say a little bit more.
Would you like to show us that video, Ursula, about the piece first, and then we can take the conversation from there? Thank you.
Is the sound okay?
Yes. Thank you very much, Ursula. I think the piece suggests loads of things that maybe we can address some of them, particularly in this age of the digital exposure, you know, and with our mobile phones and all the filters we use to present, well, a kind of reality. So, but I would like to start by asking the two of you a question. You come from different disciplines, but the two of you are collaborating with each other's discipline or each other's universe or world of creation, so to speak. Now, Ursula, my question would be, what characterizes the introduction of science into your artistic research and creation? That would be my question for Ursula. And for Georg, you can start thinking about it. What is the experience of having a scientific profile and working within an artistic institution as the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne? So Ursula, would you like to start?
So what is my interest in science, or why I'm so attracted by it? So of course it was a long way, and I remember that even when I came into the academy in Düsseldorf, I still was interested in science, and I did not find a place in the academy and the world of art where I could experience my curiosity as it was, and to dig deeper into the things and to understand how they are working in a sufficient way. So I always was looking for conversations and contacts with scientists. And in the early years, it still was quite complicated, but I can say that that was growing over the years. And today it's like, it's working in a way that I'm even addressed by scientists who wants to collaborate, but only the structures in our societies are not yet existent, that they could be lived in a way which is meeting our interests and the interests from the science.
Sure, but you feel somehow validated by the scientific community, don't you?
Yes, I could say not only validated, but it's really that we are that people contact me because they want to collaborate. Then if we discuss the conditions and the possibilities, then it becomes difficult always. But I can say that there is an equal interest today. And I heard that also from others, perhaps only in Germany, I don't know, but an equal interest from artists and scientists to do something together, because there seems to be a need for this more cultural approach to knowledge, or to a knowledge generation, and yeah, what we regard as our civilization or technologies.
Absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Georg, what would you like to say about your scientific profile and your experience of working with that profile within a more, let's say, artistic oriented institution?
First of all, good morning, everybody. Yeah, what does it mean for me? For me, it meant really that I actually going as a scientist, who I was, into an art academy 30 years ago. For me, it just meant to lose my profession. So actually, I wouldn't say today that I'm still a scientist, but I'm neither an artist. So I just somewhere in between, but this in between at the moment isn't institutionalized, so it doesn't really exist. And as Ursula already said, I think it's the problem is at the moment is that collaboration could mean a lot of very, very different things. It normally, so we have this private, this personal side. So for example, Ursula and me, we have been friends for 20 years and we have talked a lot, and these discussions have changed me and my views, and I also think have changed her views, but that's a personal thing. On the other side, we have a lot of collaborations, like the collaborations we have seen in the talk before. and also very different levels of collaboration. We could talk about that, but that's very often personal things. And we have institutions. And from my point of view, the institutions are the much bigger problem than collaboration between people. Because within these institutions, you have to present your results, and it's normally you have to decide, is it an art project and you go to an art exhibition, or is it a scientific works and you have to publish it? And if it doesn't fit to those things, then you're not existent, actually. And the fundings as well. The fundings are a huge, huge problem. You have to get funding from science, or you have to get small fundings from arts. And if you don't fit, you are not existent. Or you have to make a career. If you are a young guy, young woman, and then you have to fit to the systems. And if you don't fit to the systems, you will not have a career in those systems. And that are some much bigger problems. It's not the collaboration. It's not that the interchange of things isn't interesting. It's very, very interesting, the results, but the institutions are the problems for me.
Yeah, it seems that as you both are pointing to a real problem in the institutions where knowledge is produced, knowledge by knowledge, I mean artistic knowledge or scientific knowledge, that the word interdisciplinarity is just a word, institutions keep asking their members to do interdisciplinary work, but it's just a very timid kind of interdisciplinarity, not a real one, because as you are pointing out, when you have to submit a proposal for funding, and let's be honest, we need funding to carry out our projects, you have to tick a box. Which commission are you going to send it to? Which committee? A scientific committee, which may or may not understand a real collaboration between disciplines? Or are you going to go for an artistic, for a fine arts committee, which may or may not understand this collaboration with the sciences? So that's a real problem. And what advice can you give to bypass that very important, it's not to be underestimated, it's not to be overlooked, this institutional problem?
I could say something there. So I even would not only bypass the situation, because I think other measures have to be taken. I was in the lucky situation that I was invited to be an expert in the German Wissenschaftsrat, where we discussed the future of the third cycle of art education, which is in Europe and worldwide established during the last years. And Germany understood that they have to do the same. In one way or the other, they have to make it possible that artists are not only trained for 5 years in a master and bachelor or diploma, but that they build up a kind of their own academia, because that has also to be said, that was not existing so far. So a true academic life in an institution, even in an art academy, where an artist is just doing research to build up the discipline, to find their own values, to make a research in our own understanding, that has not existed. And that is a huge difference and a huge problem also for artists, because once we collaborate with scientists, we are at a lower level, and it's really demanding to catch up with the outcomes from scientists, and then to speak at one level or to discuss at one level. And not only financially, but also just time-wise, because our time budgets are perhaps sometimes not equivalent. So what I can say so far is that it is on the way. It is on the way to become better. But as Georg said, in the heads of the people, so once they are in an institution or once they have to decide for one or the other committee, their art and science are still completely distinct entities or distinct worlds. And Georg and I, we agreed yesterday when we spoke about what we want to say here, that this is an artificial distinction, or the divide between art and science is historical and artificial. And me, for example, I understand technology as a certain kind of culture that is one, or the emergence of technology is a cultural artifact, not only something we need or we can use or buy or pay for, but it has a culture, sometimes not a good culture, but at least we should decide if that is something what we really estimate, what we really admire or want to have. And that, in my understanding, is contemporary art, that we create an awareness for the situation in which we, the technological condition and or the environmental condition in which we are. And so I would say scientists, and that was also something we discussed in this expert group, science has its own culture. They cannot say culture is not our thing. They have their culture, and they have to discover what kind of cultures they are promoting with their doing. And so just as a proposition, that is what I would like to, or where I would like to step into a discussion, because I think really what we are doing concerns everybody. And
sure.
Yeah, and it has to be understood as also an easy everyday life thing, not an expert thing which is only treated in some academy.
Sure. Georg, would you agree, Georg, that the presence of art in what we call the sciences is still very tokenistic? What I mean by this is that it's just an instrument sometimes to, very timidly and marginally support some sort of research or embellish it aesthetically?
First of all, to the funding thing, I think we really have tried the last 30 years to bypass the problem, and it didn't work actually. Wow. If we want to have media artists working with technologies which are expensive, which are time consuming, which are very, very difficult to get in and to understand, and if we want that, then the funding system, the political system, the funding system has to change. That's very clear for me. And now, as Ursula said, it's beginning to change with this PhDs and artistic research things. It's starting to change. I think it will take another few years, but at least it's starting to change. But bypassing is not the answer. I think confronting is more the thing what we have to do. And the science art thing, as Ursula already said, I mean, if we go back, for example, 500 years, the notion of art was completely different to what we think art is nowadays. And also the notion of science didn't exist and was completely different. So that when we speak of art and when we speak of science and we speak of human inventions, and those inventions are now institutionalized, and these institutions are now, from my point of view, are restricting what could really happen. And those two systems actually, and this have also led to a lot of problems we have to deal with nowadays. I mean, we are really, or the world is in a big crisis. We have climate change, we have pollution problems, we have a huge amount of problems, and they are caused by those systems as well, the scientific system, the political systems, the economic systems. And so what we need, of course, is a change of those systems to deal with the problems, because I'm sure that dealing with the problems we have nowadays with the old systems is a problem itself. So I think we need really new new sorts of dealing with what technology. That's my field. I can't speak for biologists or for medicine. I can just speak for for the technical part and the technical sciences. And here the problem for me is very obvious. I mean, the difference between natural science. Natural sciences try to understand what's there. They try to understand something. But when we speak of technologies, the situation is completely different because technologies change the world. So with technology, we change what we can research. So technology, in difference to natural sciences or other sciences, is that with the products of this discipline, we changed the world, and we have changed it a lot. We have been rebuilding the world a lot in the last 200 years. And so, and we did it on a pure, from my point of view, pure basis of just technological problem solving and a very pure understanding of what innovation could be. And we need different, so language is a big problem for me in this field. We have to be aware that technology is changing and rebuilding the world, and that we need different systems to get a different basis for this change and for this influence into the world. And that can't be done from my point of view just on the classical scientific basis, because it's not the solution. It's also at the same time has caused this problem.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think you're addressing a fundamental question, which is that our cultural model does fragment different kinds of knowledges and languages artificially, as Ursula said, and in a very nonsensical way, right? So there is a concept that I'm really fond of because I find it fascinating, which is the concept of liminality, occupying an in-between space, right? And you could read this into different ways. When you occupy an in-between space, as you are doing with your collaborations, you can be perceived as being neither here nor there, which is the way I think institutionally these collaborations are perceived, at least at a practical level, the level of funding and the level of practicality. But there is, I think this has to change, and we have to read liminality as being in more than one place at the same time, which is a vantage position, speaking different languages, so to speak, not just languages of nation states, but the conceptual languages, which I think is what you're doing. So my question for both of you is, this sounds really good on paper, but how do you do that at a practical level? I mean, how does that real collaboration that is non-tokenistic, I mean, that is not just, a casual or a tokenistic collaboration, how does that real collaboration happen? What is your working process? At what stages you need the voice of the other?
I'm in the lucky situation that I have several collaborations going on with scientists. And very often it's like that the artist gets the money, and then we are looking for scientists to collaborate, and they are doing more or less work or executing it or whatsoever. With, for example, in my collaboration on Drosophila, I have scientists where we are at eye level, at the same level. And just to give you an idea how the collaboration went is that when we decided what should we present or what should we take as footage for our neural network then to produce voices, shall we take your recordings, the scientist's one, or my recordings, which were not in a laboratory condition, because I wish to have all the by sound, and many flies at once, and not only two, to identify their voice, but instead hearing the community of the flies. She said, oh no, don't, let's take my version. Please, we want to have yours because it sounds so much better. And here in the scientists discovered while doing this project that there is missing so much in their reality, so in the laboratory reality, and they really seek this other kind of sound impression and occupation with more than what they normally do in their restricted science.
Yeah, Georg, something to add about this?
Maybe on a more general level. I think what you need to cross the borders is, first of all, a huge amount of time. That doesn't work within 1 year or 2 years. It's to understand the other side and the methodologies and the vocabulary and all these different things of the other side. When you come from arts and go into the science, you have to deal with formal systems, and formal systems are difficult to understand, and so things. And from the scientific side also, the art is a system that's not easy to understand, and the practices that are going on there, and so you need time, first of all. And young people who are going into this direction, I think they need courage. That's something we don't need because we have full positions. We are comfortable, so we don't need courage. But young people have to be very, very courageous to go into this direction, because they lose the basis, they lose their institutions, and that's dangerous. And so they only can hope that within 10 years or so, the situation will have changed, and then there will be a place for them. But at the moment, I would say they need courage. So, and then interest, of course, it all has to start by a deep interest into what the others do.
Yeah, no, that's a major issue. I think the way we have been taught or socialized, into looking at the world is very fragmented. I recently had this brief conversation with an engineer, and he asked me, when you look at a bridge, what do you see in the bridge? Because when I look at a bridge, he said, as the good engineer he was, is I see materials and I see measures and volumes. What do you see? And I said, well, when I look at a bridge from my side of this perception, I see the possibility of reuniting with a beloved. And he was, oh, your view is much more, it's kinder than my view. I said, well, yours is better paid, but for me to reunite with a beloved, I need a bridge. And for him to build a bridge with a more encompassing consciousness, he needs to understand what the bridge may be used for. And if there is not a bridge, I may even collaborate in establishing the conditions under which this bridge must be built or constructed. So really, when we boil it down to the basics, the world needs collaboration all the time. Fragmentation doesn't take us anywhere. And speaking of this, what I find fascinating about Membrane is how the concept of reality, of what we call reality, is completely blurred. I mean, again, we are taught that there is such a thing as reality, but reality does not really exist. That is, it only exists through our subjective perception. From the point of view of the sciences, Georg, does reality exist? Obviously, from the point of view of art, it does not. But what do you have to say about that? About what we consider real, bearing in mind that we are not talking about brain damage, or we are not talking about mental health issues like schizophrenia, or we are not talking about drug taking that obviously alterate our perception of what we call reality.
I think, of course, most of the part of what we call reality, we are constructing ourselves. That's very clear. Not everything. There's something we can't get hands on. It's this metaphysical part, but a lot of what we call reality is, of course, constructed in our brain, and we don't know what sort of reality animals construct, and we don't know what sort of reality artificial intelligence systems construct. So it's completely different realities, I think, but we construct it. And that means a lot, because that means that we are at least partly responsible for our constructions. And so that's a change in in perspective. And you mentioned a very important thing. You talked about perspectives, and I think what we are trained in the different disciplines is perspectives, to take certain perspectives and defend those perspectives and work within those perspectives. And we have to learn to change perspectives and to train ourselves to look at the world from very, very different perspectives. And we need new perspectives, I think. We have the traditional perspectives, and we are trained for 5 years in computer science to have this very specific perspective and function and work as a computer scientist. And then you see that you can take on the same technology completely different perspectives, and you come to completely different results. And so for that, membrane is one example. So normally computer scientists are trained in solving problems. So you define your problem, and then you go straight ahead to solve this problem. And then you find an end, and the problem is solved, and you go to the next question, and so on. And here in membrane and with other artistic works, the thing is much, much more open. It's not, at the beginning, you normally don't have a real question or so, and you don't close the field too early and focus it to a question. You work much more with the complexity of the whole system, and try to keep this complexity of the system as long as possible. And in membrane, for example, it's not a problem-solving thing, but it's spanning up a spaces of possibilities. The space of possibilities in this case is the images, the image space, and then you have a system where you can explore this space. You don't know what you will find, but you implement a system to explore it, and that's a completely different attitude to a technical thing like artificial intelligence, to explore and to use it as a medium for exploration. And you could think, of course, of many other ways to deal with the system and to create a possibility to explore it. So that's different perspectives, and we have to learn to create new perspectives. And I think that's what art anyway does all the time, to construct very subjective perspectives.
And to insist on this uncertainty, perhaps, also to say that is a valid position. That is a
Could you speak a bit louder?
Yes, I try to speak a little louder. And to say just that this is a valid statement, that this uncertainty being navigating in those spaces of, and not pretending to know what the outcome should be or where it should go to, but instead just accepting that this is perhaps a condition in which we are, that this is a statement already, and that me as an artist, and I'm positioning me as an artist, I say that is where I am. And there Georg would then come back and say, yes, but it's mathematical fiction. You can't say it's a personal expression, etc. But this is another discussion, a much longer one, but perhaps we won't have the time now.
Yeah, I think also your piece, I mean, for me, what it first suggested to me was this, blurring, this problematizing of the concept of reality, or what we call reality. But it also suggested playfulness, because you get there and you want to interact with the machine and you want to construct your own version of reality. So it suggests that we are, again, both objects within what we call reality, but we are also active agents in the construction of these perspectives that Georg was talking about. So we construct ideology, we receive it, but we also alter it. But for me, it's a fascinating piece also from the aesthetic, the purely aesthetic point of view, because it takes us back to Impressionism, or it takes us back and it takes us forward to what technology may become, to our filters, the way we present ourselves to the world through the social networks. sorry, I'm putting too much into this comment, but it's the piece is so suggestive, and that I can help going on and on rambling on this issue of reality.
Yeah, I think for me that is very important, because since I'm working with digital means, these digital images have always been a means of expression, or I was so fascinated from the worlds I could find within these tools. And on the other hand, it was weird after being trained as a normal artist. I made so many watercolors in my life.
Right.
So I was drawing after nature. I have the whole classical background, and then just having this algorithm to produce something and to say, that's my expression. That is weird, and it's still weird, but on another level for me, it's not anymore important, because I think there is an entanglement of my subjectivity within the media ecologies we are living in. And I cannot say I'm an artist because I was born in such a condition or so on. I'm today what I was living in for the last 60 years. That's it. So I'm a product of my surroundings. And
sure. Yeah. Before we open the floor for questions, which we'll do in a couple of minutes, do you think, speaking of that, connecting with that, do you both think that for a visitor to an exhibition such as the one we have in LABoral at the moment, this kind of habitable space between the science and the art, you think the audience needs to be, let's say, educated into this kind of new hybrid language? Do you think the expectations of most people who go to an art space are more, like, as you said, Ursula, more classical, or do you think that we are gradually, do you think education is very necessary?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the experience that with the last pieces I made, I tried at least to offer so many dials and interfaces that there should be a playful and joyful encounter with the content. And if one is interested in participating, then you have to learn a lot and to read a lot and to have a good training. And that is what Georg and me are doing in our universities. But I think art has to be accessible, and I think it still should be. So I know that you need explanations sometimes close to the works, who says that is a basis that has been done and that is the outcome, that the people start to imagine, okay, what I see is the outcome of that and that. But I ask from an artwork that it has also an aesthetic quality which attracts people, and that should be, at least I wish it to be the case.
Yeah.
Or that central impressions are there which are convincing or not convincing, but we're attracting people. Do
you think that this kind of art, like the one, I don't know if you can hear me. I get this thing saying that the connection is unstable. Okay, I'm back. Georg, do you think that when visiting an art space from the perspective of the sciences, of the world of the sciences, do you think this kind of work makes art more accessible to people educated in the language of science? And we'll now open the floor. Can you hear me? There are problems with my connection. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. No. I think this is two different levels in those works, and those levels are very typical for this media artwork. I'm sure you can get something without knowing anything about the programming side of this work. You will get something. You can play around. You can try to get a feeling what's going on, and you can enjoy it or not. That depends on you. You get something and maybe you start thinking about it. But you will definitely get something else if you know how the programming side works. That's a different level. And if you exactly know what's going on, then you will think differently about the work, and you will, if you have to explain it and talk about the work, you will use different language to talk about it. That's very clear. If you ask somebody who doesn't know at all what's going on in the work, he will describe it completely different in a completely different language as somebody who knows what's going on the deeper level. He will speak differently about it.
Exactly.
And so he thinks differently about it.
Sure. So there are different layers of enjoyment and of exploring our work.
But that's interesting. That's interesting. To be able to have both and to combine it and to see both in the same work. I mean, that's the interesting thing. Not the one or the other, but that it's all in there.
It's all compatible, exactly. Well, I think it's time for us to open the floor for questions. So please feel free to leave questions in the chat box or in the question and answers box. But we have one already for Ursula. Ursula, how do you deal with art-science collaboration within the Bauhaus University? How do you resolve the different problems to get these collaborations done? Big question.
Yeah, so officially, interdisciplinary is not working so well. So on the level of the study programs, we still have problems in cause of this separation, but we have established a so-called Creación that gives money to projects. You have to define a project and then you can have money from the university or from the state of Thuringia. And that works very well because it's small money. It's not very much. It's far less than the KHM, the Academy of Georg Trogemann would have. But on the other hand, we in the Bauhaus University, we have the scientists and the artists in one university combined or together. And that is really important. So we can easily meet, we can often talk to each other, we can even go to the seminars from the scientists if we are teaching there or if we are studying. So this is very, very easy. We also define some study programs which are going over science and art, are covering both, half and half. So we can discover that created an atmosphere and even a kind of tradition, which is having its own shape or becoming something what I really missed for a long while. And young people who don't need to say, I'm an artist or I'm going to have a gallery or things like that. They are completely open. They see themselves as acting in a society for cultural purposes. And they are mediators, sometimes more mediators. Yeah. So it's starting to work.
Great. Yeah, the thing is that it starts to work. That's something. So yeah, given all the obstacles. There's another question from Elvira. She says, well, that's a great discussion. She thanks for the discussion. And then she says, I'm a PhD student in scientific research only. From my perspective in scientific method is very well defined. From my perspective, the scientific method is very well defined and unites all sciences. Is there such a thing for creating art? How well defined is a core path for producing art among the arts?
Traditionally, art is meant to be a space for freedom, for the undefined and the not yet known, and also for passes where you don't know the outcome. So in that sense, I won't say that there is a core path, but artistic research, there has been written so much about that, and that I won't be capable to even sum it up in 2 or 3 sentences. So I think what art is on a PhD level seems for me completely clear. So it's just developing art beyond that what we already know, and taking up the contemporary questions, the contemporary condition, the technological condition or the ecological or whatever kind of condition, but bringing that into the notion world of art and finding methods to be confronted to it, experimental setups to be confronted with this, and to give answers in one or the other way. And analyzing that perhaps or finding the language to speak about it to other disciplines. And that for me, so we have a PhD, I didn't mention that. We were the first PhD program, hybrid PhD program in Germany. And we have about 100 students there. So this is really an important part of our teaching.
Wow, wonderful. I don't know if there are more questions. I think, yeah, we have another question from Vidisha. How does one give a concrete proposal to convince a collaborative work when one wants to explore the playfulness of the process? How do you produce a concrete proposal? It's a very practical question to explore the playfulness.
So our students have always to formulate a concept when they start to make their so-called projects. So the concept should include, in my understanding, also an experiment. So a performative way to approach a thing, that there is a starting point, and then you do something, you observe the involvement of other criteria or worlds, and then you have an outcome, and you see if the process was okay or if you have to modify your environment or the conditions, etc. So once you have this experimental phase, this performance, it can also be in the case of a performance, just your experience, which you work on in a personal feedback on looking on a video which recorded you and doing it again and that again. So, but this experimental phase is very important. And once you define that, or once you describe that, you already have a kind of systematic approach to art, while it can stay open.
Mm-hmm. Georg, maybe you can answer the next question. Well, both of you, but maybe Georg can start. The question by Sylvia says, do you think that a possible part of the system change in the institutional approach, so in order to change how institutions see these kind of collaborations, could be to implement subjects of traditionally scientific disciplines in the first year curriculum of art students and vice versa, so that a more interdisciplinary education and approach could be produced and accepted by the academic institutions? And she thanks us for the talk. She thanks you for the talk.
I would agree. But Georg.
Yeah, it clearly would help to implement. Clearly, it would help to implement, to get really in contact, so that the art students have the possibility to get in contact with these different worlds of thinking. That's very clear. I'm not sure about the first year, because my experience is that in the first year, the students are very young, fresh. They want to do art, and they have a completely open, very often completely wrong understanding of what art is, but they want to do art, and they want to plunge into that system, and they should do it, I think. And they have to find out whether you can do art without having any interest in technology at all, for example. It's possible and has been done for hundreds of years. So you should first find out whether you are interested in this direction. And if you find out that you have an interest in that and want to work, for example, with programming and with these new technologies, then you should have the possibility to learn it. So there should be courses that offer it, but maybe it's not so important to do it in the first year. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe in the first year, students still have a very romantic picture of what their
normally they have, and
we can romanticize this as well. We can romanticize.
I'm not sure about it. Maybe it's good to correct it right away, or maybe it's good to, I don't know. I'm not sure, but And then there's a big problem, for example, within programming. You really normally have a big problem to learn programming, or some artists have big problems to learn, because you have to think very, very, very logical, and you have to really think very straight away and very logical, because otherwise your program just wouldn't work. And then you have to get out and see what you are doing. And this change of perspectives again is you have to train it, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult for everybody.
Ursula, anything to add to this?
Yes, I think it's important on a master level to implement sciences, or the opportunity to get in contact with science. But to my experience, I would say it's better if the students select the artists according to their own project, and you can implement what you can implement is media philosophy, media theory, media ecology, things like that. So a theory lesson which helps to think on a meta level, to discuss on a meta level what should be done. But then they really have to understand that art is not finishing at a gallery or at a white cube, but instead of addressing people, going to people, asking them and working together with them. And that opens up completely new field also for art, where that could exist. And I think that is where we should guide the whole discipline to.
Yeah, why is it important? I think if you want to answer the question, why is it important that artists have the possibility to learn about the technoscience explicitly? I think it's very clear, because, as I have said before, the technosciences are really rebuilding our world nowadays. And as an artist, if you want to work in this world and explain yourself in this world, you should understand something about the layers who are determining what's going on in our world. And so if you go into this deeper layers of what we are doing in our society, then it can really help you to do different sorts of artwork.
Well, I think unfortunately we are coming to an end. Like talking to you is really fascinating. I mean, we could continue discussing these issues endlessly, and everything you've said is very valuable, not only from the point of view of artistic scientific collaborations, but from the point of view of how to implement programs that are more friendly, institutionally and in terms of funding, funding bodies. To implement, real collaborations and not just, occasional collaboration. So thank you so much. And it's a pity you cannot be here as well, to talk in the midst of your own installation and your own work. But hopefully the time will come when we can share the same physical space. Thank you very much.
Thank you also very much from my side. It was really a pleasure to discuss with you.
Thank you. Let me invite all the audience to stay tuned. You can stay connected, and don't be shocked if we start talking to the technicians. We need to do some testing with the speakers of the next conversation that will start at 12:30, at 12:30. Okay, so we'll be resuming the conversations in 15 minutes, but in the meantime we'll be doing some technical testing, so just don't be shocked at that, but stay tuned. Okay, see you later. Thank you, Ursula. Thank you, Georg.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. everybody, and welcome, good afternoon, and welcome to this third conversation within the morning program of the LABoral Art&Science talks. For those of you who are new to these morning conversations, who missed the previous two conversations, let me just tell you that this LABoral Art&Science talks is a one-day symposium organized to celebrate the different possibilities and the challenges implicit in the marriage between the sciences and technology and artificial intelligence and artistic practice. I have also to say that this symposium or these conversations are contextualized as part of the exhibition that can be shown in LABoral at the moment, when the butterflies of the soul flutter their wings, which is the exhibition on art, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. And let me remind all of you who are lucky enough to be near LABoral to run and go and visit, because you can't miss it. It's full of very edifying work, very thought-provoking, and among the pieces, Kissing Data Symphony, that we will be talking about today with their artists. So thank you. I want to thank LABoral for organizing all of this, Karin Ollenschlager for curating such an interesting and much needed exhibition, and our technical assistants, because we need you guys. Thank you very much. My name is Luzmar González Arias. I am senior lecturer in the English department of the University of Oviedo, working in the field of medical and environmental humanities. So my interests in this cross-fertilization between traditionally separated areas of knowledge, I think justifies my presence here. So let me, we will proceed as we did in the previous sessions. I will briefly introduce the three speakers that we have with us for this session. And then we will talk about Kissing Data Symphony and about, the possibilities of interdisciplinary collaborations, etc. But at the end, we will open the floor for questions. So please feel free to leave your questions in the chat box or in the question answer box, and we will address all of that at the end. So without any more delay, it's a pleasure to introduce you to, first you have there on one of the screens, Karen Lansel and Herman Matt, who are the artists behind this piece, Kissing Data Symphony, that I'm sure everybody would love if you had the opportunity to see it. Artists and researchers, Karen Lansel and Herman Matt, are based in Amsterdam, and they are considered pioneers exploring the tension between embodied presence, intimacy and alienation, social cohesion and isolation, privacy and trust in post-human biotechnological entanglements with non-human others. I think this issue of trust is fascinating. Maybe we can talk about it later. They radically deconstruct and reorchestrate automated biometric control technologies, neurofeedback, and sensory perception to create poetic trust systems. Very promising, isn't it? Then we have also with us Frances Brazier, who is a full professor in engineering systems foundation at the Delft University of Technology. But before that, she chaired the Intelligent Interactive Distributed Systems Group for 10 years within the Department of Computer Science at the VU University Amsterdam. She holds a Master of Sciences in Mathematics and a doctorate in Cognitive Ergonomics, also from VU Amsterdam. Parallel to her academic career, she co-founded the first ISP in the Netherlands. So again, a conversation, as was the case with our previous speakers, a conversation between professionals and practitioners of different areas of expertise. So welcome to this session, Karen, Herman, and Frances. And maybe we can start by talking briefly about Kissing Data Symphony. I think the artists have a small presentation to show us to get started.
Yeah, okay. We prepared a small presentation.
Well, thank you for
Yeah, and thank you for inviting that. We go to the PowerPoint.
Ja. Wait. Oh nee, ik moet eerst hier share screen. Hang on. Share.
En geluid share.
En dan play. Ja, the sound is on. Waar zit hij hier?
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so...
Oh, hij staat op autoplay.
Hij staat op autoplay. Please, again. Well, we do it like this. Yeah? Herman? Yeah?
That's also fine.
That's also fine. Okay, so here's... I'll put it here.
Nee, je kan daar niks aan veranderen.
Okay. So, we will talk shortly about our research project, e.g. kissing data, in which we collaborate with Francis Brazier here today. And we research experience of social touch in neural networks, robotics, and hybrid AI algorithmic systems. And in kissing data, we explore meaningful social touch interaction in future brain-to-brain communication. Over the years, we started in 2014, we collaborated with many different partners from many different fields, from the brain technology, the touch and technology, and the system technology, and thinking about art and digital synesthesia and media art. Now, can I kiss you online is the leading question of this exploration. And neuroscientist Antonio Damasio wrote that while being in interaction with the world around, we perceive ourselves in a perpetually recreated neurobiological state. And in this interaction, our minds and brains are not disembodied, but in our bodies, part of our bodies. As artists, we explore meaningful interaction through perception of touching and kissing brains in a distributed flow of today's merging physical and virtual AI algorithmic realities. We started this project by kissing ourselves with an EEG headset, exposing our kissing brain data. This EEG interface measures motor intention, muscle and synchronization movements, cognitive relaxation, and concentration. And with these interfaces, we explore the questions, how does your kiss feel in EEG data? And this is also about ethical questions. Can and should a kiss be translated into neurofeedback data? And do we want others to kiss our private kisses from a database in the future? In the version of the digital synesthetic EEG kiss, we invite participants from the audience to kiss. In this performance installation, real-time streaming EEG data of people kissing and circle them in a floor projection. Private secrecy of kissing is exposed in the unpredictable digitized brainwaves to evoke shared emotions and imagination. And simultaneously, their brain data are real-time translated by an algorithm for a shared EEG symphony. People immerse in a reflexive datascape, an ambivalently isolating and bridging data architecture. We host with participants in dialogue to share reflection on the experience. We took this performance to many countries. All soundscapes emerging from kissing brain activity are stored in a database for shared ownership for everyone to download. And we propose people to share their privacy for data co-creation through kissing. Obviously, in different countries and cultures, kissing and caressing in public is differently perceived and performed. Based on the performances, we explored the question, can correlations and validations be found between meaningful kissing and data patterns at the Philips Lab Eindhoven? Over the years, we found that an intimate kiss needs, in fact, sharing, creative reflection. It needs unpredictability and ambivalence. And we have to design moral agency to share experience of vulnerability and imagination. And with this knowledge about the need for sharedness in social touch. We explored the question, can we share collective brain-to-brain waves of kissing in kissing data for future collective multi-brain-to-brain kissing? And in this performance, multi-brain computer interface for kissing and seeing to be kissed is for both kissers and spectators, or co-kissers as we call them, wearing EEG headsets. Together, kissers and co-kissers co-create a shared datascape of sound and data visualization through sharing kissing and mirror neuron activity. And we interview and stage dialogue with all participants during the performance.
It's often that the person who watches has a lot of the same feelings than the people that really do it. So the visuals and sexuality and intimacy, I think they are really quite important to create this connection and these feelings. Also ich finde es ein großes Glück und das freut mich, dass es
was more like use that for me, and I let the video goes outside myself, not just to her in a directional way.
We share a moment of intimacy, but it's very public, so the tendency is to just look away.
Even wearing this thing like that makes you invisible.
In the end, when they were smiling at each other, I felt happiness. But it's really nice, actually, to see people kissing.
It was like two layers of a different wave frequency. It was two waves. They were the first wave, but then it was the next wave of the people around.
I was a bit nervous in the beginning, but then with the sound, it was totally gone. For me, it was kind of interesting to hear the sound patterns changing. The imagination of a little music bed.
At the very beginning, I was like more conscious about the sound, but the very end, I didn't really feel the sound, and I was more focused on my insides.
Ich hatte das Gefühl, ich schaue weniger auf die Personen, euch, sondern als die Intimität an sich, an die. Und das finde ich sehr schön. Also, danke. Und ein großes Glück.
So together, kissing and caressing brains of all cultures, genders and ages share an intimacy data symphony. In 2020, it was impossible to perform this, and it made it all the more urgent to explore this knowledge in online environments. So in the intimacy agents, we experimented with co-creating sound through performance of us, e.g. kissing, and combined with the sound of the spectators' heartbeats. And in Empathy Ecologies, which was performed 2 days before the final lockdown in the Netherlands, we created a live soundscape emerging from algorithm and touch connections between epiphyte orchid architecture, photosynthesis, sensor technologies, and brain activity of human touch to take the path to a further entanglement of sharing empathy. Okay, thank you.
Here, stop sharing, click. Yeah. So we're back.
Wow, thank you very much. That's really, really interesting. So many interesting things that you touch upon in your work and in this presentation. And maybe we can start by the three of you letting us know a bit about how your collaboration started. When did you decide that you needed each other? How did it all start? Did it all start as a kind of crazy idea or a very serious reflective process?
Yeah, well, yeah. I should say, well, this touches at the heart of the conversation, I think, of the Art&Science talks, is that we worked on interactive performances for years as artists, and at some point we found that we need to deepen our understanding of the interaction as a participatory system. And within the arts at the time, it was very hard to find any feedback group on this. And then we thought the best way to seriously undertake this exploration, we started the PhD, and we were very happy to be connected by Caroline Nevian with Francis Brazier. And then it started, but I think it was 2012. So it's not only this specific project that we collaborated upon, but also different projects.
And Francis, what has been your experience collaborating with artists? I'm curious to know your point of view.
Well, it's basically this, well, it's very comparable to other interdisciplinary projects which have been involved. It's trying to understand their perspective and ours as well, and trying to get this, how to combine this. So I mean, whereas we say we're designing for participation, which needs engagement, empowerment, trust, and we're interested in how emergence takes place, all the same themes and concepts. And I mean, we design complex systems that are meant, I mean, you know ahead of time they're going to change, so you know there will be emergence. Mm-hmm. We don't design the disruption, but Karen and Herman design the disruption. They do that purposefully to understand what's happening. But even though all the words are the same, and we do value-based design, all these words are the same, the interpretation is just slightly different. And I'm definitely not an artist, but it's really understanding how these perspectives come together makes my brain sometimes, well, it challenges my brain, and sometimes it kind of hurts, right? You're trying to make it go even further, but to actually understand what they actually mean and what they're saying, to be able to understand how it can come together. And I think that's the challenge, and it's been the challenge we face very regularly in our long discussions. And but what do you actually mean? No, that's not what you mean this. And then they're saying, oh, but you know, so these discussions are very interesting. But it's also exploring how you could be viewing what they're doing as a system. And what we do in our work is model thing. Okay, so how can we come up with models? What are you actually doing? And in our recent discussion, we came up to actually by understanding, by being able to model what they're doing, their perspective, you can actually decide on the steps that need to be taken to understand it even more coherently, I think.
Right, you said that the interpretation was different. Can you tell us a bit about that? In what way is your interpretation so different, or significantly different at least?
Well, things like it works. What does it mean it works, right? They'll say, I've done it and it works. Well, what does that mean? It works. Oh, I can see people feel. What do you mean you could see people feel? We need to, so it's the, how do we go about making this explicit, right? So you clearly understand that the host makes a difference, right? And we know that from education. We know from many different disciplines that having someone be there to help people reflect, but they, of course, as artists, find a form to make this work. But then to say, okay, it works. I mean, that's a wonderful expression.
Yeah.
I mean, we have systems that we make this work as well, but what does it mean to work? They're feeling something. Okay, how are we going to know they're feeling something? But I can see they're feeling something. No, but what? Make that explicit. Making that explicit in the course of the our interaction has been a challenge.
Yeah, so I think aspects of, I think we wrote a lot of papers together. We published a lot, and on these questions, and one of them is the validation, the need of describing validation. You say, you quote us as it works, and that is.
It was in the beginning only.
It was in the beginning for us as artists. There is an experience. You create something. There's an interaction, and it's not explicit made. Grounds, you decide this works, and the grounds are there but not made explicit. Whereas in science, these grounds has to make explicit, and then you are going to describe them. And I think for us it was very valuable, but it's of course important not to lose this other intuitive antenna, artistic antenna, the one that says it works or it doesn't work. So you, as artists, I think for us, it's been so rich to be able to have both tools, if you will.
What I learned from it is that you can ask a sort of paradoxical question to your audience to get feedback that you actually need. So if you ask, how does your kiss feel in EEG data? Then some people say really nerdy, like, you cannot feel data. It's a stupid question, but it triggers immediately the imagination, and it evokes discussion, and that's what you actually want with your audience.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right,
yeah,
right. So, how would you respond to this question, Francis? What can art do for the sciences? And Karen and Herman, what can the sciences do for art? You know,
you don't trust the question the other way around, right? Francis, will you say first?
I think for me, the question is too generic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really is in the collaboration that you can accomplish. I think a level of maturity is necessary to do this type of interdisciplinary work. I think that holds for all disciplines, but here especially. And yeah, Karen and Herman are artists of fame. They know what they're doing. And then to want to look at it from a scientific perspective also brings them science, and it brings us a different perspective on what it means to design for empowerment, what it means to design for engagement. So the principles, the values on which we base most of our work are almost the same, but the way it's actually interpreted, the way it's used is different. And that's a broadening of our knowledge. It's okay, we do, I mean, we have industrial designers in the group that do design in social practice, but it's always it's just slightly different. So we have really valuable conversations, but it also means we're, as I said, we're challenging our interpretations and we're broadening them. But to say art and science in general, I think is too generic, because design is definitely, it's a discipline I know a lot about. But that's design, that's not art. But design is art, so it comes together. But I think, like, for actually all of the interdisciplinary work I've been involved in, I have to be intrigued by the people I'm working with, right? And the interest in, and that makes for fruitful collaboration. Say we need to work together, yeah, well, we need to do lots of things. But it really is being intrigued by the way people are thinking, the questions they're how they're going about and approach what they're doing. That needs to be intriguing, and there has to be a personal interest. If it's not there, it makes no sense. So we're not talking education, we're talking research. And for research, there really has to be the right chemistry.
Right.
And once that's there, then you're willing to invest, and you're willing to spend your time and try to understand what the other are saying and what they're doing and what that can, what we can achieve.
Yeah. How about you, Karen and Herman? What can the, I know it's a general question as Francis put it, but what can the sciences do for artistic expression?
Well, for me, what helped us in thinking is the way we managed to develop models of how we interact with each other and how the technologies have a role in that as an actor. So once you can, in a model, present the technology and the humans and then you understand better what you're doing, and you also understand better what your next steps will be.
Yeah, you understand better what the detailing of the steps really mean. And it makes a sharper hypothesis to move in the next adventure. So and the meaning of what has happened in the performance, because every performance is an experiment for us, becomes more clear. And I would also give another answer to this. Like, I think, Francis, remember in the very beginning, we were discussing the research questions. And this took a long time because the research question is a very nice example of that has a different meaning in art and science.
Right.
So then you're only starting and it's different already. And there's this fragmentation entering the room. So we wanted to find there the bridge. And so we every time when I said, or Herman said, yeah, we want to make this performance and this shared interaction. And then Francis said, okay, so to what purpose? So how can we shape the question based on the purpose? And then we immediately got stuck. And then there was a silence, like, what's the purpose? And we said, purpose? You don't think in purpose, you make an open space. And then Francis got stuck, yeah, but what's the open space? So this is, I think in both previous talks this morning, these kind of issues were there. And at some point, I remember on the table, it came like, well, we look for a space for reflection. That's what art, that's an important aspect of art. Is an essential aspect of art. And this space for reflection is not, is emergent, is always emergent. There is no solution, it is an emergent space, it's a space for emergent reflection. And there's no solution.
It creates an open-endedness.
Yeah.
That is
so I think necessary. But correct me if I'm wrong, Francis, but I think in the social values at the Participatory System Initiative in Delft, the reflection, the self-reflection became more accepted and more understood and used social design value.
I think reflection has always been there. I have papers from like 30 years ago when I was modeling reflection. What does it mean for people to reflect? But the fact that and that reflection is one of the key values, I think that's also well understood. But to not know what you want to reflect upon, that was where we had this issue, right? So you want to reflect, well, what do you want to reflect on? What do you want them to think about? And I think for me, one of the major eye-openers when you said, but art is always about disruption. I never saw it about disruption. And that really took some brain power to what does that actually mean, right? But and you do that with multisensorial connections, right? So all the senses are disrupted, not all of them, depending on what you're doing. Some will be disrupted. You're bringing that together, but you're doing that to have people reflect upon what they're experiencing.
So what you mean is, whereas reflection has also always been a key value, key design value, it's a reflection towards a solution, I would say. Whereas in art, we create reflection based on ambivalence and disruption. And once there is a solution, we create immediate, we point at the disruption immediately again to open up again the reflection. The act of reflection and the process of reflection is in fact the key factor to design for us. Rather than
the process of reflection for a purpose, right? So how do designers think is something we've been looking at for many years, and we're trying to understand how that reflection takes place. Yeah. Whereas you're
and in both fields, reflection is a key factor.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. Yeah. What a fascinating creative process. You know that
has been and is still a creative process. Yes.
What a community.
But I think key to this is also the fact that we try to use new technologies that change our social behaviors and that change also the way we reflect. So it's not just the reflection; it's also the reflection through these technologies that change our behaviors
and how you can facilitate reflection.
Yeah.
Right.
But also the empathy, right? Because as we were discussing in the preparation, robot hands, robots can shake hands. Robots can shake hands with people, and we know exactly which points to touch and to make you experience it as having you're shaking someone's hand. But shaking someone's hand in real life also entails looking at someone, feeling something, the empathy that you're conveying. And it's that you're referring to as social touch. Okay, what is real touch, and what needs to be done if you really want to accomplish touch? And originally your work was Can I Touch You Online? That was the original title of Kana's work. What does it mean? And it doesn't necessarily mean you're mimicking the feelings, the right sensors that you'll feel that you're touching someone online, or someone's holding a baby and you'll feel the same way. You know, I mean, the way you're doing it is disrupting it to make me think about it.
Right.
Which is a completely different perspective. So what does it mean to actually touch someone, social touch, to touch someone not in real life, but in the distance and the shared social touch that you achieve with that kissing? People in the audience feel they're part of the kiss.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's
and then you're coming to the point of how to use data within an environment as kissing data. And the brain data in this project are not used for biometric validation, but in fact we use uncontrolled datification. So you cannot direct or stir them or influence them actively as a kisser or as a co-kisser. They appear from your brain activity as participating in the kissing environment. And the data itself are actually questioning themselves, and also there as a co-actor stimulating the reflection. And in all performances, we discuss the data with people. We let them know these data do not foretell the quality of your relation, because people really want that. Are we, based on the data that we see, can you tell our marriage to be great or our relationship to be passionate? No, we cannot. So we tell them in advance, and then after the kissing, we discuss these data, and then a shift has happened. People look at these data together and they say, these data are in fact the traces of our kiss. It is the traces of our memory. And they co-create these traces, and they appropriate them as traces for a new shared storytelling. And based on the data, they start to reflect and tell the story of their kiss.
Right.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is not just the kissers, it's the people, the participants are also become part of that kiss. That also becomes their data somehow, which is just amazing. That you're, it's not what the actual data represent. Yeah, it is what they represent, but it's not the peaks or the shape. There's no pattern detection. It's really they're embracing it, and it's become a co-creator in their co-creation process.
Yeah, it's like recording a collective, history of collective affectivity, right? Like, and connection and interconnection also with non-humans, like not only the human community, but non-humans, as Francis would say, robots, more than human entities, and this need for connection that we have today. I mean, in order to understand what is going on in the world right now, we need to have this kind of global, transcendental affective understanding. I think, I wonder, this is really, really fascinating. And I wonder if, as part of your conversations was how to present the data in a piece of art, how to combine these different languages, how to present in a, space or exhibition space, how to present this,
I know, but I think it wasn't about what you actually presented. That's right. It really is about how do you get the connectivity? How are you going to involve people, right? I mean, things like you had people hold hands, unthinkable right now, but you have people hold hands, and that made a major difference to your performance, right?
I'm sure you're further reflecting on all of this after, when the COVID, with the social isolation of the pandemic, and how this has changed radically the way we see your work. Like I've been visiting your work since the exhibition opened, and we all reflect on that and how different the perception of this work would have been, and the experience of this work would have been only a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Are you going to push? Are you going to push the project any further, given the what we are living?
Yes. Well, currently we're developing a new work together with a project in London. They invited to work, which we now call. Well, it has several stages. We're working now on Touch My Touch, and then we will develop an performance installation. Mirror My Touch. So the Touch My Touch will be an online touch performance interaction for people to touch online. And
Mirror My Touch will be for semi-public space, so that you can
for museums
so you can then collaborate together in the same space with someone else through an online connection.
Yeah.
Wow.
By touching yourself.
So this form is clearly developed within the COVID period. The installation itself invites you on 1.5 meter distance to connect online through touch.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, about this collaborative making together a intimate caressing act, and through that creating a new virtual persona.
Right.
And we're very excited about how it develops currently.
Yeah.
So
Because you're pushing the boundaries of what we consider intimate and intimacy. Particularly in this day and age, when everything is exposed, there's this overexposure on the social networks. So, where you cross this in and out, into intimacy and into the public, you cross that in your work very well.
Well, I think that we not only need to touch and feel being touched, we also need to see each other touching.
Right.
How we perceive touch and to imagine touch for the future together, because we can only experience touch if we share imagination about touch.
Yeah, well, that's really, really interesting. I think everybody who is listening to this conversation may be feeling the same as me, like extraordinary jealousy at the way you have created this space, this comfortable and habitable space between, in this case, Frances and the two of you. And Frances mentioned some minutes ago that for all of this to work, you need a level of maturity, isn't it, Frances? That you need a maturity in your area of expertise to then try to establish a bridge across which you can communicate. So I wonder, because we've been talking the whole morning about interdisciplinarity, and there was this idea of maybe bringing interdisciplinarity to early career stages. So what would be your position? I mean, how could we make this a reality? Would you agree with implementing educational systems that invite these conversations from a very early stage? Or would you rather believe in continuing a specialization, even if more open to conversations with other areas than traditionally? What would your position be?
You can introduce some interdisciplinarity. The department I'm in is technology, policy, and management. So we bring these fields together with a very well-defined area. So you could say you can bring art and science together at an early age. But I believe that to be an artist, you need to be an artist.
Right.
And that then you become a partner in the discussion doesn't mean you can't use technology, but then you're using technology. And of course, then you need some knowledge of science and technology to be able to do it. But that's a different use of, that's not the synergy of the perspectives or the way of working. So I think you need to somehow develop the way of working. Again, doesn't mean you don't need any science during your artist, but you need to become an artist, I think, to be able to express your needs and perspectives, and from science the same. And what we've seen, at least in the past, is that somehow society needs you to have a basic title. I'm a biologist, or I'm a physicist, or I'm a mathematician, or I'm a social scientist. But then maybe at the PhD level, that's the right level to bring these together.
Right.
Once you've got the background, I'm not saying that interdisciplinary programs are useless. I mean, we have communication science, we have interaction design, we have many fields that also bring different disciplines together. But if you're talking about it at a generic level, interaction design has some overlap with art, but art really entails challenging the world. We're challenging the world too, but in a different way. So I think you need some type of maturity in art or in science to be able to bring the two together. But maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to be proven wrong, but I think, I mean, I've discovered in our discussions, Karen can just say, no, but this is the way artists think. Boom, and that's a fact, right? Whereas if...
you're exaggerating largely.
You tell me, art is disruption, that's a fact. Or in the history of art, I mean, artists have to learn about the history of art. They know about, you can bring this to be, you can bring these points to the table, and then with, at least convince me it's true, and then bring them together. So I think artist is a different way of working, a different way of challenging the world, and that you need that.
Well, but what I also think is that what scientists and artists brings together is that they can be inventors in some way by going through a certain disruption or shifting a perspective and then coming to a solution. So the creative process of coming to something is maybe not necessarily that different.
No, the worlds aren't that different to begin with. No, but I think that when we need to be creative, we have no other choice as scientists, as do you as artists. And we've discovered the worlds are very similar, because to get our things accepted, you need peer reviews, you need your peers to accept that what you're doing is innovative and new. The same thing holds for, we've discovered the worlds are very, very similar in the way they proceed for, right? You need peers to decide that this art is worth funding, or same thing we do with our research projects. So I think the worlds are very similar in that aspect.
Right.
But the way we embrace creativity is different.
Right, right. Yeah.
It takes time to understand, to create a language together. So whereas in we felt like, yeah, but this is the way, this is the artistic perspective, this is how to make it explicit and then find a language together takes time, I think. You take patience and time and faith that you will find a bridge. I think faith is important, and take the risk and faith. And I think since we worked with Francis, since we collaborate with you, Francis, I think we learned a lot about these different perspectives and make it explicit. Also made our art more when we talk about it, make more accessible for others in science, but also in society, to understand what this interaction is really about. So I think this society at large is already interdisciplinary.
Right, right. Yeah, trust is another word together with faith, but trust is another word that came up when I was introducing you. Like it's part also of the, when you trust the other side of the story or a different perspective, magical things can happen, isn't it? But you need the trust as well.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's no trust without risk.
Sure. Yeah, risk and trust go hand in hand. I totally agree. Yeah.
And as I said, the chemistry has to be right. It has to feel right. Doesn't mean you'll always be successful, but I mean, we've got other artists in the group as well. Same type of thing. You have to believe each other's perspective and believe the potential of what we're working on.
Sure.
But this is very close to the core of our research participation. Yeah.
Sure. I would like to open the floor for questions, because I think our audience, remember that you can leave your comments or questions in the chat box or in the other box called answers and questions, at least in Spain, preguntas y respuestas, I don't know in the English language platform. So are there any questions from the floor? We will have to bring Kiss and Data Symphony again to to this part of the world when we can experiment with it and play around with it and sit there and kiss and touch, huh?
That would be great. There's something coming.
Yeah, there is one question. Could you please explain, from Sylvia, could you please explain the main differences you see in the interpretation of your project outcomes from an artist and a scientist perspective? Thank you very much for the interesting talk.
Are there major, I don't know if there really are major differences. I think what we're coming to understand is like a model of how you can go about designing social touch. That will be Karen's thesis, in which it's taking a scientific perspective on what you're doing. I'll never become an artist. That's become very clear. But I can help think about the creative process and the scientific interpretation, as in what does it actually mean? What does it mean for trust? They're the publications we're actually working on. What does it mean? What does social touch actually mean?
I think too that we started with differences, like this is how artists think, and Francis saying, yeah, but this is how scientists think. And we looked at each other and thought, what is this about? And over the years, we found a bridge in thinking and working and language. I think that's very important. So if we write papers, it's about this bridging and making clear where you bridge and where fields are rich in their being fragmented, because you can only meet when you're different, right? When you're the same, you can't meet. So you meet, but then a new field emerges of language and understanding. And I think if there are differences, I'm confronted with differences at the moment that from scientific perspective, and this is not the way Francis and we are talking about it, but when the perspective is more on please validate the EEG data of the kiss. And then another discussion starts, and it's a different way of thinking. And so I think Timothy Morton has expressed this nicely in his book. In science, data represent things, and in art, data point at themselves for reflection. And for reflection is what I'm adding, but they point at themselves. And I think what we do together, Francis and Herman and I are bringing those two together.
Right.
Questioning, how is it represented? What agency do we have and do we need to stay in touch with interpreting these data, and what new ways of data appropriation are available and can we imagine? And how can they support, how can we design them to support our intimacy in a different way and enrich?
Right.
So it doesn't mean
Sorry?
It means that you can create qualitative data and use them for analysis to make either both your creative steps and maybe scientific research. And that's also with the project that we're currently developing, that we're already integrating these kind of questions to generate qualitative data, but it's not the first aim.
Right. Mm-hmm. There is another question here. Well, there are two more questions. The first one reads, it surprised me that you as a scientist, Francis, are mentioning the you're mentioning the chemistry. Could you concrete a little bit more? What are the characteristics of this chemistry? Art and science collaborations work.
Well, I think it holds for every collaboration.
Yeah.
I mean, even for every PhD student I have, I don't know when I say I have 12, but there has to be something there that's going to make it work. And yes, as a scientist, can I make that explicit? No, it has to feel right? You have to be willing to go through a long process of understanding and working together. And so it has to be intriguing. It has to be challenging. Well, this has definitely been intriguing and challenging, but I also have to feel wanting to spend the extra time, energy, to want to do it. And I think that holds with every collaboration. And art and science, this one I said stretch my brain a bit further than normal, but yeah. I think that's really, yeah, it's not a scientific approach, but I think it's a fact of life. I mean, why are some people friends and why are others not? There has to be a basis to make the collaboration work.
Sure, yeah. Well, the next question, Stefana asks, hello, I'd like to know how you came up to work together on these projects and how the participation continued over the years. Thanks for the interesting talk. And I'd like to know as well how this working relationship has also influenced in more personal projects, like adopting new methods and ways of approaching things.
I think Karen can answer that one.
Yeah. So over the years, because we were writing and publishing papers and essays, we started more precisely making notes and about what happens during the performance and reactions of participants. And with this...
Yeah, we also discussed about how to host and what questions we should ask the audience and notes.
Yeah,
and
make questions more specific.
More specific, and what our role as a host is, and become more aware of that and more precise.
So because we teach a lot too, what we feel that in the arts really misses out is a more systemic way of thinking about interaction. So as we teach, we often find in media art that there's a severe cut between interaction design and art. And we think, well, if you create interactive work, you're in fact designing forms of interaction, and maybe in a different purpose, different context, but it's also a kind of interaction design. So, and then the interaction is, whereas in other medium, like in painting, the medium is paint. In interaction design or in artistic interaction design, the medium is behavior. And behavior is, and behavior for connecting in interaction art in all kinds of ways, and the aesthetic principles you need to make it an artwork and interaction are less easy to describe in an objective manner, because you cannot stand in front of an interaction. You're always in an interaction. And to make it more explicit and discuss this with students, for example, we created a model, a visual model together with Francis. And so this model we have been making more precise over the years, but we use the model also ourselves. So the model is used to make details more clear, and we test the model and it really works. So I think next year or end of the year we will publish the model, and yeah, we hope to distribute it and help others with it.
Wow, yeah. Herman, did you want to say something?
No, it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, and there's another thing I wanted to briefly comment on, and is this, you mentioned that you're publishing your results, and at a practical level, is it more difficult to publish in, the way in academia, we are asked to publish in high impact journals, with, of high specialization, etc. At a practical level, Francis, is it more difficult to get your work out there and validated by impact journals when you are collaborating with the artistic community, or not?
Of course, but that holds for all interdisciplinary research,
sure.
But especially for art and science. There are dedicated channels, and as long as you're within the dedicated challenge, we've done very well. But as soon as you step aside, it really depends on the reviewers. We've had reviewers who will start questioning the EEG measurements. Well, that's not what the paper was supposed to be about. Or, that happens in every interdisciplinary project, but it really is the dedicated channels that bring these two together. There you have reviews that make sense.
Yeah.
From our perspective, right? They all make sense. Reviewers are always very objective, but then from their own perspective. So their perspective is, we're interested in the technology. Well, the papers aren't about the technology. the papers are about the artistic part involved. So it really is choosing the right channels. And as soon as we step outside of the channel, we end up in this very hazy area. For example, how objective are your findings, or how can it be replicated? No, it can't be replicated. It was an artistic performance, right? I mean, it's obvious. I mean, I'd ask the same questions, right? But you can't, it's not objective in the normally scientific objective way. And that's why we had the discussions, okay, but what are you, if you want to say something's happened, how, then you can say this was observed, but then you have to be able to have something that you're observing, right? That's all right. Or people say things, you've got words, we can use those. But it's, so what type of backing can we find for the, I think we found a method to do that.
So I think this is always for artists and kind of blurry space between what is the intention of the work and what can you observe that is actually happening in the work.
Yeah. And
I think through working in a scientific context, this division had to be made very specific, very explicit. Yeah.
Right, right. I think, but you have created such a wonderful space, and it you know, the history of your relationship, of your collaboration is long. I mean, maybe this facilitates or this triggers that the collaborations are established always between the same artists and the same scientists, because otherwise it would feel like too time consuming to start from scratch building a common language or building a common space, isn't it? Like, in other words, like for Francis, it would be easier to work with the two of you again than working with artists that had never experimented with this, you know, crossing of boundaries. Am I right?
Yes.
And the same for the artist. It would be difficult to explain all of these to a scientist that is used to this little box rather than to a more open, you know, collaboration.
Yeah,
right?
but over the years, we met many scientists who are longing for interdisciplinary and working with artists, actually. And the whole thing is that people, all of us, need to feel safe in what we feel is important, and if in a general from a general point of view, if artists and scientists collaborate, and if a scientist doesn't feel safe anymore within his or her scientific perspective, then the collaboration won't work. And this counts the same the other way around.
Sure.
But you have to acknowledge the fields.
Sure.
And collaborate and find all kinds of merging entanglements.
Yeah, sure. I'm going.
Also understand the complications, just like we said. You can't expect everything to be that you could be replicated. I mean, if that's going to be the criterion, well then you're making life difficult, and that's a generic thing we now know. So.
Sure. We have like 2 minutes only left, and I would like you to be very quick, you know, when answer. I don't want to leave this question unanswered so that we can answer all the questions. Harriet asks, how very interesting to analyze the new language that Francis and Karin and Herman had to develop to understand each other. But the question is, would the end be that the language and tension in images are always bigger than words can contain? A kind of philosophical question.
Yeah, well, we hope so, because then it keeps evoking language, new language, I hope.
And reflection.
Yeah.
Okay, but the model is an image, right? So that will help. But if you say images are stronger, they are, but then how are you interpreting them? And in science, we have to understand what the image is supposed to represent, right? And then we need the words to make it more explicit. That's exactly the next step.
Yeah. How interesting. Well, thank you very much to the three of you, to Karin, to Herman, to Francis, for sharing, for being so generous with us and sharing all of this with us. You've been really a source of inspiration, and I hope that our paths cross again. For everybody who is listening, let me just remind you that this closes the morning program, but we will resume the sessions in the afternoon. I have here the program. We have the program. We have this exciting evening program starting at 6. So you are all very welcome to participate. We'll have Karin Olenschlager, the curator of the exhibition, chairing the sessions, and the speakers will be Clara Go, Diego Diaz, and Pablo Perez. The session will be in Spanish, but there will be simultaneous translation for those of you who come from non-Spanish speaking countries. So thank you very much. What a pleasure. And hopefully, as I said, we will meet again and we will continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's very nice. Bye-bye.